Don't you want to try the coffee I made especially for you, honey? My husband James asked with an odd smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I was sitting at my sister-in-law Nina's elegant dining table in her Nashville home, where we gathered for our monthly family brunch. The coffee cup in front of me had a strange, almost metallic smell that made my stomach turn. My name is Christina, and at 29, I never imagined I'd be questioning whether my own husband was trying to poison me. But after 3 years of marriage and countless incidents of accidental food poisoning, I had learned to be cautious, especially around Nina. She had a way of orchestrating situations that left me sick or humiliated, always with that same innocent smile James was wearing now. "How thoughtful of you," I replied, forcing a smile while my mind raced. The aroma wafting from the cup was unlike any coffee I'd smelled before. It reminded me of the time last month when I'd ended up in urgent care after drinking tea at Nina's house. The doctors couldn't explain my symptoms, and Nina had insisted she'd made the tea exactly the same way she made her own. Nina watched me intently from across the table, absently stirring her own untouched coffee. "James has become quite the barista lately," she said with a smirk. "He's been practicing different brewing methods just for you." The way she emphasized "for you" sent chills down my spine. I had noticed James spending more time at Nina's house lately, claiming they were planning a surprise for our upcoming anniversary. But something felt off. The whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room, the strange texts I'd glimpsed on his phone, and now this coffee with its peculiar scent. I lifted the cup, pretending to take a sip while studying their expressions. James and Nina exchanged a quick glance that confirmed my suspicions. Making a show of checking my phone, I stood up abruptly. "Oh, would you look at that? I need to make a quick call for work. Nina, would you mind if I use your study?" As I walked past Nina's place setting, I deliberately stumbled, quickly switching our coffee cups in the confusion of steadying myself. "I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, straightening up. "I'm such a klutz sometimes." Nina waved off my apology with a tight smile. "Just try not to break anything in the study." I nodded and hurried away, my heart pounding. Through the study's doorway, I could still see them at the table. Now I just had to wait and watch. From the study doorway, I watched Nina lift the coffee cup to her lips, and my stomach clenched with anxiety. Part of me wanted to stop her, to warn her, but I needed to know the truth. I'd spent too many nights in emergency rooms, too many hours doubled over in pain, always after sharing meals with them. It wasn't always like this. When I first met James at a friend's wedding in Nashville 3 years ago, he was charming and attentive. Nina had seemed welcoming too, inviting me to family gatherings and offering to help plan our wedding. But looking back, I should have noticed the red flags, the way she would accidentally spill things on my dress at important events, or how my food always seemed to have extra seasoning when she helped cook. The incident started small. An upset stomach here, a mild allergic reaction there. James always had an excuse ready. "Maybe it was something you ate earlier," or "you must be coming down with something." But the pattern was becoming clear. The worst was 2 months ago when I ended up hospitalized after eating breakfast at their house. The doctors found traces of something in my system they couldn't identify. But James convinced everyone I must have taken some expired medication. I gripped the door frame, watching as Nina took another sip of the coffee. James was typing on his phone, seemingly unconcerned. My own untouched cup sat cold on the table where I'd left it, the metallic smell still lingering in my nose, making me shudder. A slight tremor in Nina's hand caught my attention. She set down the cup, her face suddenly pale. "James," she said, her voice shaking. "Something's wrong." James looked up. His expression changing from confusion to horror as he realized which cup she was drinking from. He jumped up, knocking over his chair. "Nina, what's happening?" Nina's hands were trembling violently now. I don't I feel. She tried to stand, but stumbled, grabbing the edge of the table for support. James, what did you put in that coffee? I stepped out of the study, my phone already recording. James was beside Nina now, his face ashen. That wasn't supposed to be your cup, he whispered. But in the silence of the dining room, his words carried clearly. Nina's eyes widened with realization and fear. Call an ambulance, she gasped, sliding to the floor. Please, I can't. I dialed 911 immediately, my hands steady despite the chaos unfolding before me. Nina was on the floor now, her body racked with violent tremors. James knelt beside her, panic written across his face as he realized their plan had backfired spectacularly. Emergency services. Yes, we need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Grove Drive, I said clearly, keeping my phone recording with my other hand. My sister-in-law appears to be having a severe reaction to something in her coffee. She's conscious, but experiencing tremors. As I spoke to the dispatcher, Nina's eyes locked onto mine. The usual cold calculation in her gaze was replaced by raw fear. Christina, she gasped. You switched. You knew. Ma'am, the ambulance is on its way, the dispatcher assured me. Please stay on the line. James was growing more frantic by the second. Nina, what's happening? That wasn't supposed to. It wasn't meant for. Shut up, James, Nina snapped through gritted teeth, her anger momentarily overcoming her distress. This is all your fault. You said it would just make her sick enough to miss the board meeting next week. You promised it wouldn't be traced. My blood ran cold. The board meeting where I was scheduled to present my proposal for a major client account. The same account Nina had been trying to land for months at our competing firms. Everything started clicking into place. The tea last month, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. And the breakfast incident 2 months ago, those weren't accidents, were they? Nina's face contorted with another wave of pain. The tea, that was supposed to keep you home during the Johnson contract presentation, but you went anyway. She clutched her stomach, doubling over. James said, he said we just needed to discredit you. Make clients think you were unreliable. The sound of sirens filled the air. And there it was. Just like that, in the span of 30 seconds, the 3 years of my life that I thought I understood. Shattered. I stood in that dining room, sirens growing louder outside the window, and I felt something strange wash over me. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even anger. Not yet. It was the cold, quiet clarity that comes when your mind finally accepts what your gut has been screaming for years. I had not been paranoid. I had not been clumsy with my health. I had not been mysteriously prone to illness. I had been targeted. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. I know that because I watched every second tick by on the kitchen clock above Nina's refrigerator, the one shaped like a rooster that she bought on some vacation to the Tennessee countryside and bragged about every single time I came to visit. Even in that moment, I thought to myself, that clock is going to outlast this marriage. The paramedics came through the door in a rush of equipment and urgency. I stepped back, still recording, still on the phone with the dispatcher. James was trying to compose himself. You could see it, the way he straightened his shirt and wiped his face before they entered. Like presentations still mattered, like he was still managing the scene. What did she consume? One of the paramedics asked. Coffee, James said quickly. Too quickly. Just regular coffee. She must have had a reaction to. It was in the cup she was drinking from, I interrupted, my voice flat and even. The cup was originally intended for me. My husband prepared it. I switched the cups before drinking any. The paramedic looked at me, then at James. James looked at me like I had just put a knife in his back. And honestly, good, because what he had been putting in my coffee was far worse. They loaded Nina onto a stretcher. She reached out and grabbed the paramedic's arm as they lifted her, And for a moment, I thought she was going to say something meaningful. Something like, "I'm sorry, Christina," or "Tell them the truth." But Nina, being Nina, even flat on her back and trembling, looked at me with those sharp green eyes and said only, "You'll regret this." And I thought to myself, "No, Nina, I really, really won't." They took her out. The ambulance doors closed. And then it was just James and me. He stood across the dining table, Nina's beautiful dining table with her rooster clock and her cream-colored linen napkins, and he looked like a man watching his entire world fold in on itself, which, to be fair, it was. "Christina," he started, "I can explain." "Don't," I said softly. "It wasn't supposed to be dangerous. It was just, we thought—" "James." I held up my phone. The red dot of the recording was still blinking. "I have everything Nina just said on audio. The part about the board meeting, the part about the Johnson contract, the part where she said you promised it wouldn't be traced. All of it." He stared at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. And for the first time in 3 years of marriage, I watched James, confident, a charming excuse always ready, James, go completely, genuinely silent. I picked up my purse from the back of the chair. I picked up the coffee cup I had never drunk from. I placed it carefully in a Ziploc bag I found in Nina's kitchen drawer, wrapped it in a linen napkin, and put it in my bag. Evidence. "I'm going to follow the ambulance to the hospital," I told him. "Not for her sake, because whatever was in that cup needs to be tested. And when those results come back, James, every single person in your family, your company, and your social circle is going to know exactly what kind of man you are." I walked out the front door. He didn't follow me. I sat in my car for exactly 45 seconds before I allowed myself to shake. Just before I drove away, I did something that I want you to understand wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was quiet, practical, calculated. I pulled out a second phone, a burner I had bought 3 weeks earlier, when my suspicions had grown strong enough that I started genuinely planning, and I texted one contact, my attorney. "It happened. I have audio. I have the cup. Meet me at Nashville General in 1 hour." She replied in less than 30 seconds. "On my way." See, here's what James never understood about me. He married me because he thought I was soft. Because I smiled easily and I forgave quickly, and I never raised my voice during arguments. He mistook kindness for weakness. He mistook patience for passivity. But I had been patient for a reason. Now, before I go further, and I promise you, the best is absolutely still to come, I need to stop for just a second. Because right now, I know some of you are watching this on your lunch break. Some of you are lying in bed, one earbud in, wondering how this ends. Some of you have been in relationships where you felt like something was wrong, and everyone around you told you that you were imagining it. You felt it in your gut, in your bones, but no one believed you. This story is for you. And real quick, my mother told me this channel would never make it past 1,000 subscribers. She said no one cares about these kinds of stories. She said I was wasting my time. So if you're watching this right now and this story is hitting different, if it's making your heart race a little, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Not for me. To prove that stories about survival, about truth, about the quiet strength of people who refuse to be broken, those stories matter. They matter enormously. Let's show her together. Now, back to Christina. Nashville General Hospital is not a dramatic building. It's all fluorescent lights and beige walls and the constant low hum of machines. Not the kind of place where you'd expect a 3-year conspiracy to finally unravel. And yet, that is exactly where I sat at 11:42 on a Sunday morning, watching the clock on the wall while a toxicologist walked down the hall toward me. Her name was Dr. Morrow. She had seen things. You could tell. She had the kind of eyes that didn't flinch. "Miss Christina," she said, sitting across from me in the consultation room, "the cup you brought in, The one you believed was prepared with a foreign substance. We ran a preliminary panel. I nodded. Well, we found elevated concentrations of a compound typically derived from ipecac syrup, in very high doses, enough to cause violent gastrointestinal distress, vomiting, tremors, and in rare cases, cardiac complications with repeated exposure. She paused. This was not a trace amount. This was deliberate. My attorney, Margaret, a tall, no-nonsense woman who had been in family and criminal law for 22 years, clicked her pen and wrote something down without looking up. Nina is stable, Dr. Morrow continued. Her system is being flushed. She'll recover. But Miss Christina, if you had consumed that cup yourself, given what we know about your medical history over the past several months, the cumulative effect could have been severely damaging to your heart. Severely damaging to your heart. I let those words sit in the room for a moment. 3 years, monthly family brunches, shared meals, thoughtful cups of coffee made just for you, honey. And every single time I ended up in urgent care or flat in bed for 3 days, James would hold my hand and say, I don't know what's happening to you, sweetheart. Maybe you need to see a specialist. He was the specialist. Him and Nina. Specialists in breaking me down slowly enough that no one would ever see the pattern. Margaret looked up from her notes. We're filing for a protective order today. We're also requesting that the hospital preserve all samples for independent forensic testing. And, she glanced at me with the kind of look that means, are you sure about this? We're going to the police. I had thought about this moment for weeks. In the quiet of my home office, late at night, when James was supposedly asleep, and I was reading everything I could find about domestic harm, evidence collection, and what a person is supposed to do when they realize the danger they're in is coming from inside the house. Yes, I said, we're going to the police. What happened next surprised even Margaret, who had spent 22 years thinking she'd seen everything. James, it turned out, had been keeping records. Not of the poisoning, he wasn't that organized in his guilt, but of everything else, the business deals, the money. See, here's the part of the story that the dramatic version always glosses over because it's complicated. James and Nina weren't just trying to hurt me physically. They were trying to hollow me out professionally, financially, and socially, so that by the time they were done, I would have nothing and no one would believe me if I tried to speak. It started, as I learned from Margaret's investigation, about 14 months before that Sunday brunch. I worked in business development at a mid-sized consulting firm. I was good at my job, genuinely good, and about 1.5 years ago, I had been shortlisted for a significant promotion that came with a seat on the board. Nina worked at a competing firm. We had always kept our professional lives separate, or so I thought. What I didn't know was that 3 of the major clients I had been cultivating, clients I had spent months building relationships with, had been receiving subtle, anonymous communications suggesting that I was unreliable, erratic, that colleagues had concerns about my judgment, that they had heard through industry circles I was dealing with some personal instability, anonymous, untraceable, delivered through intermediaries so carefully that even when 2 of those clients began pulling back, I blamed myself. Thought maybe I wasn't doing enough, wasn't sharp enough, wasn't well enough, because I kept getting sick. Margaret's private investigator found the trail in digital breadcrumbs, deleted emails that weren't fully deleted, a shared calendar between James and Nina that had entries like CB meeting day, timing critical, and check-in, target outcome confirmed. CB, Christina Beaumont. Me. I was a target with a calendar entry. I sat in Margaret's office on a Tuesday evening reading those entries, and I want to be honest with you. It didn't make me fall apart. I had already grieved. I think I had been grieving, slowly, for years, every time I forgave something I shouldn't have, every time I told myself I was being too suspicious, every time I pushed the feeling down and smiled across a dining table at people who were quite literally counting on my silence. By the time I read those calendar entries, the grief was done. What I felt was something much quieter and much more powerful. Resolve. Nina was discharged from Nashville General 3 days after the brunch. She walked out of that hospital looking thinner, and for the first time since I'd known her, genuinely rattled. Her lawyer met her at the door. Mine met her at the corner. Margaret had timed it deliberately. As Nina stepped outside with her attorney at her side, she was served with a civil complaint, detailing the documented poisoning incidents, or the professional sabotage, the evidence collected from the cup, and the audio recording from that Sunday morning. Nina's attorney looked at the filing, then at Margaret, then back at the filing. "We'll see you in court," he said. Margaret smiled the way only a woman who has done this for 22 years can smile. "Yes, you absolutely will." Meanwhile, the police investigation was moving. The lead detective, a methodical, quiet man named Detective Hargrove, had interviewed James twice in 4 days. James, to no one's surprise, was doing what James had always done, constructing a careful, plausible alternative reality. He told Detective Hargrove that he had added an herbal supplement to the coffee at Nina's suggestion because he had read it was good for digestion. He said he had no idea it could cause harm. He said the idea was entirely innocent, a wellness thing, something he saw online. He said Nina had gotten sick because of a pre-existing sensitivity he couldn't have known about. He said it calmly. He said it with appropriate amounts of regret and confusion. He was very good at this. But Detective Hargrove had my audio recording. And in my audio recording, in Nina's own voice, she said, "You promised it wouldn't be traced." You don't say that about a herbal supplement. James's story started fracturing on the third interview. That's when Hargrove presented him with the calendar entries Margaret's investigator had found. That's when James saw the full picture of what they had documented, not just the brunch, but the tea incident, the breakfast incident, the client communications, the timeline of every moment I had been made sick, coinciding with every moment something professionally significant was happening in my life. According to Detective Hargrove, James sat very still for almost a full minute. Then he asked for a lawyer. "Here is where I need to tell you something important. Because a lot of revenge stories, the kind that go viral, the kind people share at 2 a.m., they end here. They end with the bad people caught and the good person vindicated and everyone going home. But the real story doesn't end there. The real story is what happens to you after." Because while all of this was unfolding, while lawyers were filing motions and detectives were conducting interviews and toxicologists were writing reports, I was still a person who had to go home every night to an apartment that I had quickly rented when I left the house James and I shared. I was still a person who had to call her mother and say, "Mom, the marriage is over, and here's why." I was still a person who went to work on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, while carrying all of this inside her like a stone. I was still a person who, at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, sat on the floor of her new apartment eating cereal from the box because she hadn't bought real food yet, and cried. Not from sadness exactly, but from the sheer accumulated weight of years of wondering if something was wrong with you, and finally knowing. Nothing was wrong with me. Everything was wrong with them. That's not a triumphant feeling at first. It's more like when you've been holding a position for so long that when you finally let go, your muscles hurt worse than they did before. Healing hurts. Truth hurts, even when it sets you free. Nina made her first mistake 1 week after her discharge. She gave an interview. Not to the press, to our shared social circle, a dinner party at a mutual friend's house. I wasn't there, obviously, but 2 people who were there texted me independently that night, and what they told me made my jaw drop. Not because it was shocking, but because it was so perfectly Nina. According to the guests at that dinner, Nina told everyone that I had been unwell for years, that James had been worried about me for a long time, and that the incident at the brunch was actually me having some kind of breakdown, and that I had confused the cups myself, accidentally, and then tried to blame James because I had been emotionally unstable since losing a pregnancy 18 months ago. I want you to absorb that for a second. She took the most private, devastating moment of my life, the miscarriage I had suffered 18 months ago, which I had barely discussed with anyone, and she weaponized it. She turned my grief into her alibi. She used my pain as a character assassination in her defense. When Margaret told me what Nina had said, I sat in Margaret's office and was very, very quiet for a long time. Then I said, "I need you to add that to the filing." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "The defamation," I said. "What she said about me at that dinner party. I want it documented. I want it in writing. I want the guests who texted me to give statements." I paused. She just made this worse for herself. Margaret looked at me with what I can only describe as professional admiration. "You know," she said, "most of my clients spend the first month crying in my office." "I cried at home," I said. "Alone, on my floor, with a box of cereal." She nodded slowly. "Fair enough." 3 weeks after the brunch, 3 weeks of lawyers, detectives, hospital reports, and sleepless nights, I walked into my company's boardroom at 7:45 in the morning in a slate gray blazer and heels that clicked on the marble floor like a metronome counting down. The board meeting, the one James and Nina had poisoned me to miss. I wasn't going to miss it. My proposal was 62 pages. I had been building it for 4 months. In the week since the brunch, I had refined it twice, sharpened every number, tightened every projection. Because here is what getting poisoned repeatedly by the people closest to you teaches you, if you're paying attention. The work is the one place they couldn't touch me. They could try to make me sick. They could try to undermine my reputation. But they could not sit down at my desk at midnight and do my job better than me. I presented for 40 minutes. No trembling hands. No uncertain pauses. I knew this material the way you know something you fought for. Completely. Bone deep, without doubt. The room was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then our CEO, a pragmatic woman named Diane, who I had always respected, looked around the table and said, "I think we've found our lead on the Whitmore account." The Whitmore account. The one Nina had been trying to land for 11 months. The one James and Nina had tried to keep me away from with doctored cups of coffee and months of quiet sabotage. I got the account. I called Margaret from the parking garage and said 3 words. "It worked out," she said. "It was always going to work out. You just had to get there." Now, at this point in the story, you might be wondering about James. What was James doing while all of this was happening? James was unraveling. See, James had spent 3 years married to someone he fundamentally misunderstood. He had believed that I was manageable, that I was someone who could be redirected, destabilized, quietly maneuvered out of the way whenever convenient. He had been wrong, and now, watching the legal machinery close in around him, he was discovering just how wrong. He called me once, the week after the brunch, before his lawyer told him to stop. He called from an unknown number, and I answered because I didn't recognize it. And for just a moment I heard his voice. And for just a moment something in me remembered the man I had thought I was marrying. "Christina," he said, "I just need you to know that I never wanted it to go this far. It was Nina's idea at first. And I got pulled in and—" "James," I said. He stopped. "Don't," I said. Same word as in the dining room. Same tone. And then I hung up. That was the last time we spoke before the hearing. The civil hearing was on a Thursday morning in early November. Nashville had gone gray and cool, the kind of day that makes the world feel very serious and very real. I wore the same slate gray blazer from the board meeting because I am a person who believes in symbols. The courtroom was small, the way civil hearings tend to be. No gallery of spectators, no dramatic theatrical space. Just attorneys and a judge and the cold, organized weight of documented truth. Nina had hired one of the best attorneys in the city. He was expensive and methodical, and he had clearly spent significant time preparing a narrative in which Nina was a misunderstood businesswoman and I was an emotionally volatile woman who had mistaken innocent wellness supplements for malicious intent. He was very good. He just wasn't better than the evidence. Margaret presented the toxicology report, the audio recording, the calendar entries. The documented pattern of my medical incidents correlated with professional milestones. The statements from the two guests at the dinner party where Nina had weaponized my miscarriage. The digital trail connecting anonymous communications to clients with Nina's devices. One by one, piece by piece, the alternative narrative dissolved. At around 11:30 in the morning, Nina's attorney requested a brief recess. They came back 20 minutes later. Nina looked like she had aged 5 years in the hallway. Her attorney cleared his throat. My client would like to address the court directly. This was unexpected. The judge nodded. Nina stood. She was poised. Even now, she had that kind of bone-deep composure that comes from spending a lifetime managing appearances. But there were cracks in it now. Small ones. The kind that only appear when the performance is finally over. She looked at me across the room. I told myself, she said slowly, that I was protecting my family. That you were taking James's attention, his loyalty, his time, in ways that She stopped. Her jaw tightened. I told myself a lot of things to justify what I did. The judge was watching her carefully. I introduced the compound into Christina's drinks on 3 separate occasions, she said. Her voice was even, almost clinical, as if speaking about someone else. The intent was not to cause permanent harm. The intent was to create enough disruption in her professional life that she would be perceived as unreliable. James was involved, in varying degrees. In varying degrees. Even in her confession, Nina was managing the narrative, protecting herself, minimizing. But it was enough. More than enough. Margaret didn't say a word. She simply placed the full forensic report on the table and let the silence do what silence does best. The judge looked at the report, looked at Nina, and looked at me. Ms. Christina, he said, are you satisfied with the documentation before the court? I looked at Nina, truly looked at her, maybe for the first time without fear or confusion or self-doubt muddying my vision. Yes, Your Honor, I said. I am. The outcome of the civil case. A substantial judgment in my favor, covering medical expenses, emotional damages, professional damages, and legal fees, one enough to fully furnish the apartment I'd been living in with minimal furniture. Enough to stop worrying for a while. The criminal case ran in parallel. Deliberately administering a harmful substance. Conspiracy. The charges were real, and they were taken seriously. James reached a plea agreement. He cooperated with investigators, gave a full accounting of his involvement, and received probation plus mandatory counseling and significant community service. His career did not survive the exposure. Nina went to trial. She was convicted on 2 counts. She received a suspended sentence with strict conditions, the full civil judgment against her, and the permanent loss of her business license in our industry. Her firm did not survive. The rooster clock in her dining room was probably the only thing that came out of that whole story intact. People ask me what revenge feels like. When you plan it carefully, when you execute it correctly, when justice actually arrives. What does it feel like? I'll be honest with you, because this is that kind of story. It doesn't feel like triumph at first. It doesn't feel like the big swell of music in a movie where the credits are about to roll. It feels quiet. It feels like a window finally opening in a room that has been closed for too long. It feels like your first full deep breath after years of breathing shallow. The day after the civil judgment, I went to work. I stopped at a coffee shop on the way, a little place 3 blocks from my apartment where I had become a regular, and I ordered a cappuccino. The barista, a college student named Danny with paint on his jacket, handed it to me with a genuine, uncomplicated smile. "Enjoy," he said. I stood outside on the sidewalk in the November morning, holding that cup with both hands, and I drank it. Just coffee. No strange smell, no metallic edge, no racing heart wondering what was in it. Just coffee, hot and good, on a cold morning, in a life that finally felt like mine again. I cried a little, right there on the sidewalk. Danny definitely saw through the window. He pretended not to. It was the best cup of coffee I've ever had. My company gave me the Whitmore account, and 6 months after the board meeting, the promotion I had been building toward for 2 years. My team is 4 people now, all of them sharp and loyal, and none of them named James. I see a therapist once a week, a kind, a thoughtful woman who helped me understand that what I experienced was a form of domestic manipulation and coercive control that went far beyond 2 bad people making bad choices. That there are patterns, names, and frameworks for what was done to me. That it was not my fault that I trusted people who had decided, from almost the beginning, to exploit that trust. Understanding that didn't make me bitter. It made me careful, not fearful, not closed off, but genuinely, wisely careful in the way that people who have survived something difficult often become. I became someone who trusts her instincts. I became someone who documents things. I became someone who, when her stomach turns at a strange smell, listens. James moved out of Nashville within a year. I don't know where he is. I wish him, and I mean this with complete sincerity, a long and quiet life far away from me, during which I hope he spends considerable time thinking about the specific moment he decided that breaking someone slowly was an acceptable substitute for honesty. Nina, the last I heard, had relocated as well. Her polished life, her Nashville connections, her industry reputation, all of it rebuilt from scratch somewhere else. Maybe she learned from it. Maybe she didn't. I stopped tracking her progress the day the judgment was finalized, because the most powerful thing I ever did was stop making her story the center of my attention. She had taken up enough of my life already. I want to close this story not with a dramatic flourish, but with a few honest words, because the most important part of this story is not what Nina put in the coffee, or how the case was resolved, or even the moment I switched those cups. The most important part is what happened before all of that. It's the moment, the quiet, ordinary, terrifying moment, when I stopped telling myself I was imagining things. Because that's the hardest part of a story like this. Not the legal battle, not the evidence collection, not standing in a courtroom watching the truth finally spoken aloud by the people who spent years hiding it. All of that, as difficult as it was, came after the hardest part. The hardest part is the private, internal moment when you say, something is wrong, and I am going to trust myself enough to do something about it. Most people in situations like mine never get there. They keep explaining things away. They keep forgiving the same patterns. They keep accepting the version of reality that the people around them have spent enormous energy constructing. Not because they're weak, but because the people constructing those realities are often the exact people you love most, and your heart fights your instincts at every turn. I was lucky. Luck is not the right word. I was persistent. I held on to the thread of my own perception when everything and everyone around me, including my own husband, was telling me to let go of it. If you take one thing from Christina's story, from this whole painful, dramatic, ultimately redemptive sequence of events, let it be this. Your body knows things. Your gut knows things. That quiet sense of wrongness that you keep pushing down because you don't want to seem dramatic, because you don't want to cause a scene. Because you've been told too many times that you're too sensitive or too suspicious or too much. That sense is data. It is real information, and it deserves to be taken seriously. You are not paranoid for noticing patterns. You are not weak for needing time to act on them. You are not wrong for hoping things will change. But you are also never, never obligated to wait until the evidence is so overwhelming that you end up collapsed on a dining room floor. You can leave earlier. You can trust yourself sooner. You can decide, at any point in the story, that your safety and your clarity and your peace of mind are worth more than keeping the peace. And to everyone who is watching this right now, whether you're on your lunch break or lying in bed, or sitting in a car in a parking lot avoiding going inside somewhere you don't want to be, I see you. These stories matter. The stories of people who survived manipulation, who trusted themselves, who fought quietly and steadily for their own lives and won. They matter. They always have. Christina didn't win because she was lucky. She won because she paid attention. She won because she kept one hand steady on her phone, one eye on the truth, and the patience to wait for exactly the right moment. She won because she never let them convince her that the strange smell wasn't real. Trust the strange smell, always. And if this story moved you, if it sat with you, if it made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because somewhere out there, someone is sitting across a table from a cup they shouldn't drink, and they need to know. They are not imagining it. They are not alone, and they are going to be okay. They are going to be okay.